Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. You do not know how happy I am. Seriously, this is going to be an interesting stream, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you. Let's do this, just like we always do.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. Hit the like. Not saying it. Almost said it, but I stopped myself. Remember, I am going to stop saying that. That is my new goal, is to stop saying that. So I almost said it, but I'm not saying it. But anyhow, folks, glad to be here with all of you tonight. Every single one of you is a valued member of our community. And the way these streams work, for those of you who may not be familiar, is first I give my opening remarks. Then after that, I do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. And then I answer people's questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our show, send a question in. Send a Rumble rant on Rumble and send a super chat on YouTube, right? Either way, I can answer your questions in the second half of our program. If you're on Facebook, I can't answer, you can't send a super chat question that way. So you need to come to the YouTube or to the Rumble in order to send your question. I can't see the Facebook stuff, but I can see the Rumble and I can see the YouTube. And that's the way it works. And, we're still happy to be on the other Facebook platform. We just can't see what people are saying. So people are commenting live, I cannot see it. So there you go. But anyhow, I got a lot to talk about tonight. One big thing we've got is that the tradition of CPI morning messages is back in business. Yes, every morning on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel, we are having, morning messages from members. We're trying to do it every single morning if we can. Peter Coffin had this brilliant new design of there's like a link where you can drop the video so people don't have to go through this whole process of sending it to me and blah, 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 blah. So we've got the morning messages are back in business. We are rolling ahead with the morning messages. So that's very, very exciting. And that is a great way to start your day. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism with CPI morning messages. So tomorrow's morning message, I'm dropping it in the chat. This is a great way to start the day. 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time is when they air. And they premiere on the channel, and you can watch it whenever you wake up, if you wake up after that. And it's a way to start your day with the hope and optimism that this community offers to people, right? Start your day. And let me add, very few of the messages are by me. I might do one occasionally, but very few of them are by me. They are by members from around the country. Start your morning, start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism on the CPI YouTube channel. We're getting that going. And if you would like to make one, we can send you the link. CPI members should have the link, and if you need the link, we'll provide it to you. I'm not going to leak it publicly just because I don't want people doing crazy stuff. But, David Fox can absolutely do one. We would love that, David. A morning message from down under. That would be awesome, right? David's out there in Australia, beloved member of our community. We'd love a morning message from David. So send it our way. Send it our way. It's really, really great. So that tradition is back in vogue. The other announcement that I would like to make for tonight is that if you would like to join the Center for Political Innovation, we would always love to have new members, because our organization is marching ahead. I am so excited about different projects that are in the works right now. So yes, we are marching ahead. So join the Center for Political Innovation, become part of this amazing community. We've got a lot to offer. We got reading groups going on. We got outreach happening. This community is marching ahead and on fire. Marching ahead and on fire. Yes. Yeah. Marching ahead and on fire. We are very excited. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. See, I'm saying it. It's like I'm trying not to say that, right? We don't care about social media. Social media is fake. It's not real. It's rigged. Ugh, I just need to not say that phrase anymore. I am eliminating that phrase from my vocabulary. We no longer talk that way. We are focused on building our community, not building an internet fandom. So working hard at not saying that. But anyhow, just a quick reminder, the way this works: opening remarks first, then the roll call, and then after that, I answer people's questions for the rest of the night. Rumble rants on the Rumble, YouTube super chats. That's the way we do it. All righty. Okay. All right. Not saying it. I almost said it right there. It's just routine for me to just, when I'm opening my streams, I talk that way. But we're not. We're changing the way we see things, right? It happens. Old habits die hard. And you are absolutely right, Killian. They do. And that's why new habits take a while to cement. And that's what we're undergoing in our organization right now. We are adopting some new habits. And I am excited about everything that's going on in CPI. These amazing new business cards, that have been designed. I mean, they're just utterly amazing. Everyone loves them. Look at these business cards. They are awesome. They are absolutely awesome and tremendous. 4-point plan to save America, QR code, pro-humanity, pro-growth. I mean, this is awesome. We are in a really good spot, right? Change is coming, and it's good change. We are ready to move ahead, and we're ready to do out of the movement to the masses for real. But anyhow, I will now begin my opening remarks for tonight, which I don't know if you saw the election results in the United Kingdom. I don't know if you saw them, but the Labour Party, as they call it in Australia, where they also have a Labour Party, right? That's for you, David. But the Labour Party that they have in Britain is back in power. The new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is Keir Starmer, and he's the leader of the Labour Party after they ousted Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, as you remember, he was the leader of the Labour Party in Britain. He was kind of a new guy who came in, and he had a record as an anti-war activist. And so they started calling him anti-Semitic. For a couple years, they beat the drum that he was anti-Semitic. And, they got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, and now Keir Starmer is in power. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind about this election. First things first is that, and those of you that are in Britain, I do apologize, because British people understand American politics very well. Republican, Democrat, end of story, right? But Americans don't understand British politics. They really, really don't understand British politics. So I'm going to break it down here just real quick, right? In Britain, you've got two major parties. It's not exactly a two-party system, but the two big parties are the Labour Party, which is kind of like the Democratic Party here, except it calls itself a socialist party when it's not. And then you have the Conservative Party, which is nicknamed the Tories, and they're like the Republicans. They're conservatives. You also then have the Liberal Democratic Party, which is a party that is somewhere in the middle. And then in this recent election, you had a wave of new parties like the Reform Party of Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage won a seat in the parliament for the first time. He's run many different times. This is the first time Nigel Farage actually won a seat in the parliament for his Reform Party. There were a variety of other parties. But anyhow, what happened last night, they're portraying it as a big sweep for the Labour Party of Britain. It was not that. It was an epic defeat for the Conservative Party. The majority, the voter turnout that happened in Britain was dismal. It was record low turnout. People just didn't go out to vote. And the people who didn't vote tended to be people who had voted for the Conservative Party in the past. So in a number of constituencies where Conservative Party members didn't go out to vote, the Labour Party won by default. Also, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party took votes away from the Conservative Party. And the Conservative Party has been running Britain since the days of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And they've been running Britain, Boris Johnson and, all of them, and now Rishi Sunak. Well, they're out. They've been running Britain for quite some time, and they've been not making things any better, and they're out. Now, what's interesting is this was a loss, not just for the Conservative Party that's been running Britain for so long. There was also a loss, an epic loss for the Scottish National Party, the party that advocated for Scottish independence. And I got to say, they deserve it, because I was a huge supporter of Scottish independence and the Scottish National Party for a while. In 2014, when the Scottish independence vote was taking place, when they made the issue about austerity and opposing cuts in public spending, I loved Scottish independence, because it seemed like an anti-austerity move to stop cuts in public services, etc. And Tommy Sheridan is a Scottish socialist that I look up to, and he was, an advocate of the Scottish National Party and Scottish independence. But then when Brexit happened and when the pandemic happened, the Scottish National Party got wokeified. And it became the party of anti-Brexit, right? Because Britain left the European Union. The Scottish National Party, their line became, Scotland will stay in the European Union if we declare independence, right? And then when the pandemic happened, the Scottish National Party became the party of lockdowns. It became the party of woke cancel culture. And the Scottish National Party really just deteriorated into what in American terms would be considered wokeness. Instead of being an anti-austerity party, it became a woke party. It became an SJW party. And of course, they fell flat because they've been governing Scotland for quite some time. And they haven't been doing a good job. So, good riddance. They were a huge letdown. I was very excited about Scottish nationalism in 2014. I'm not excited about it no more. Ever since the pandemic, ever since Brexit, they have really just deteriorated into something bad. So the Scottish National Party went down in flames. And the Conservative Party voters stayed home, and Nigel Farage and the Reform Party got a seat for the first time. And because all the parties that had been doing well lately lost, the major party that wasn't in power for quite some time, the Labour Party, they won, and they're back in power. After their purge of Jeremy Corbyn, after their crazy expulsion of all kinds of people they accused of being anti-Semitic for supporting the Palestinians, the Labour Party, the pathetic imperialist organization that mistakenly calls itself the Labour Party, is now back in power. Now, folks, because now everything I just said to a lot of Americans is news. Now, if you're in Britain, you already know everything I just said, and nothing I'm saying is remotely profound. But what I'm going to point out here tonight, and this is very, very important, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, but is red. And in fact, I will never forget how I almost punched my television when I saw J.K. Rowling being interviewed by Jon Stewart years ago. It was one of my most angry moments. I was in college, and J.K. Rowling had just written her first non-Harry Potter book. And she wrote her first non-Harry Potter book. And so she was being interviewed about it on The Daily Show by Jon Stewart. And Jon Stewart said, and she said that her book was about a housing complex that opened up in a blue area. And she said, now, blue in Britain means conservative, whereas it means blue in Britain means right wing, right? Whereas in America, blue is associated with the left, and red, red is associated with the left in Britain, and blue is associated with the conservatives. And she said, I wonder why it is that red is the color of the left in Britain. And she said, I wonder why that's different. And Jon Stewart said, yeah, I don't know why that's different. Why is it that over there red is the left-wing color and that blue is the conservative color? Why is it reversed over there? And they both just like pontificated for a moment. Why is red associated with the Labour Party? Oh, and I'm sitting there screaming at my television. Are people this ignorant of the history of our movement? The Labour Party, that in its manifesto says it is a socialist party. Its anthem is, the people's flag is deepest red. It shrouded oft our martyr dead. Their anthem is the red flag. The Labour Party was started to be a socialist party. It was not a socialist party, never has been. But it pretends to be one. It is a party of social democracy. It was the British party that was part of the Second International, a party that labor unions started to be their party to represent working class people, factory workers in the parliament. That's how the Labour Party started. And the Labour Party, originally in its constitution, it had what was called Clause 4. And I will read to you what Clause 4, I might even be able to find an image of it. Hold on. Clause 4 of the Labour Party manifesto or constitution. Yeah, here it is. This is what it originally said in the until the 1990s, or until the rise of Tony Blair. This was the official text of the Labour Party's constitution. It was called Clause 4. It was the famous Clause 4. To secure for the workers by hand or by brain the full fruits of their industry and the most equitable distribution thereof that may be possible upon the basis of the common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, the best obtainable system of popular administration and control of each industry or service. And that was originally part of the Labour Party's rules, but their official document said that they believed in socialism, public ownership of the means of production. That was originally part of what they stood for. And that, it gets infuriating to me because that Paul Kanger guy, that anti-communist who goes on PragerU, in one of his videos, he said, nothing happened with Marxism. Karl Marx wrote about it, but nothing really happened with Marxism until 1917. Bull honky. How can he say nothing happened with Marxism? Marxism was huge. Marxism created the British Labour Party. The people who started the British Labour Party were Marxists. The people who started the German Social Democrat Party were Marxists. The labor unions were started by Marxists. The people who demanded the right of women to vote and organized protests all over the Western world demanding the right of women to vote were Marxists. The suffrage movement in Britain demanding that women have the right to vote was led by Marxists. There was so much Marxism all over Europe. There was tons of Marxism. Labor unions were formed. Marxist members of parliament were elected. Marxist educational organizations were created. Marxist marching bands and Marxist choirs and Marxist summer camps for children. And Marxism was all over Europe. But it was gradually losing its revolutionary energy. And that is what everyone noticed. The German Social Democratic Party had millions of members. The British Labour Party had millions of members. Seats in Parliament, it was massive, and still is. It's the second largest party in Britain. At this point, it is the ruling party of Britain, right? And these socialist organizations were growing by leaps and bounds, but there wasn't any revolution happening. And the message was getting less and less radical. And then in the lead up to World War I, all these socialist groups got together and they had a conference and they promised they would never support a war. They would never support a war. They would never send workers to kill other workers. And then World War I broke out. And the British Labour Party and the German Social Democratic Party and the Austrian Social Democratic Party and the French socialist groups and all of the big Marxist groups in Europe that had millions of members and seats in parliament and all of that, they all sold out and supported World War I. And the Labour Party is the Marxist party in Britain, the socialist party in Britain that sold out and supported World War I. And all the serious revolutionaries in Britain had to break away from it. And they eventually formed what became the Communist Party of Great Britain, right? And in Germany, you had the German Communist Party. In the United States, the Socialist Party didn't exactly support World War I, but many of its leaders did. And ultimately, it was the failure of social democracy that led to the creation of the Communist International. And that's why when Lenin returned from exile and he returned to Russia in July of 1917 or April of 1917, he presented his April theses to the Russian communists. And he said, we can't call ourselves social democrats anymore because the social democrats sold out and supported World War I. So we have to start calling ourselves communists so that no one thinks we're the same as these people that sold out and supported World War I. So understanding where the British Labour Party came from is very important in understanding the history of our movement and anti-imperialism. The British Labour Party were socialist in words, but imperialist in deeds. They supported World War I. They supported colonialism. They supported sending British troops to various places to colonize and oppress people. They preached socialism, but they practiced imperialism. And what they were really doing was they weren't fighting for the working class. They were fighting for the temporary privileges of the labor union bosses and the so-called skilled workers that dominated the labor unions. That's what they were fighting for. They weren't fighting for socialism. They were fighting to increase the privileges that higher paid workers and the higher paid skilled professions got. They were fighting to increase the bonuses and the payouts that labor union bosses got for misleading workers. And the role of labor union bosses in running capitalist government. That's what they were fighting for. They were not fighting for socialism. And it's in response to the Labour Party and the German Social Democratic Party and all that Lenin said we must go lower and deeper to the real masses because social democracy has failed. And the British Labour Party is that party. They are the party, the Marxist Socialist Party that sold out and supported World War I. That is the British Labour Party. And this is important history that they don't teach you, but it's important information because this is the ruling party of Britain now. And it's a party that used to originally be with us, but it was pro-imperialist. And if you're pro-imperialist, you can't be a socialist. And that is a mantra on these streams that I've repeated over and over again. If you're supporting imperialism, you can't be a socialist. And if you're opposing imperialism, whether you like it or not, whether you think you're a socialist, whether you think you're a communist, if you're opposing the imperialist system, gradually you are going to become more and more socialistic in your orientation. And this is what defines the world we live in. And this is Lenin's great book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Then he talks about this. In our modern world, capitalism is in its monopolistic stage. Capitalism, the highest stage of capitalism is imperialism, dominating the globe, holding back development, the export of capital, an international financial oligarchy, trusts, cartels, and syndicates, the export of capital. This is Lenin. The world is dominated by big bankers and ultra monopolies, big corporations that are holding back development around the world. They are keeping the world poor in order to make themselves rich. That global order that started with Britain. Britain was the first imperialist country. The British Empire of Cecil Rhodes. The British Empire. That was the first imperialist country. And imperialism, in order to work, it had to divide the working class between the skilled workers and the unskilled workers. And that was how imperialism was able to do what it did. And the labor unions and the socialist movement became dominated by the skilled workers. And the skilled workers were seeing their living standard go up as a result of imperialism. So they created a socialist movement that sounded revolutionary in words, right? They had clause 4, right? They had this really nice written phrase that they believed in, right? To secure all workers, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, they were imperialists. And that this is really important. The Labour Party in Britain is not a socialist party, and it could never be a socialist party. You can't be a socialist party if you're against China. You can't be a socialist party if you're sending weapons to Ukraine. You can't be a socialist party if you want sanctions on Venezuela. You can't be a socialist party if you are in favor of the United States invading Iraq. Tony Blair, a leader of the Labour Party, was George W. Bush's biggest ally when they invaded Iraq. This is not a socialist party. It's a party that exists to defend the temporary privileges of the labor union bosses and of some of the higher paid skilled workers. It's a party that seeks to make imperialism work better by having more of a welfare state. And Lenin talks about this in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Great book. Really great question, because DSA is part of the same international organization the British Labour Party is part of, the Second International, the Socialist International. They are the same organization. DSA is the American version of the Labour Party. They are the same organization. They even use the same symbol, the red rose. So you're right on point there, Gabby. They are the same organization, right? I'll show you the logo of the British Labour Party. Labour Party. The Labour Party logo, right? The symbol of the Labour Party is this red rose. Hold on. All right, this is the symbol of the Labour Party. It's a red rose, and I will show you the symbol of Democratic Socialists of America. It's the exact same symbol, except it has a handshake beneath it. They are the same party. DSA and the British Labour Party are one in the same, and they are social imperialists, right? They're the red rose of social imperialism. So there you go. But after World War I and after the Russian Revolution, all the people who'd opposed World War I, all the people who were sympathizers with the new government that emerged after the Russian Revolution, all of them that broke with the old Labour Party, they formed the Communist Party. And the Labour Party vehemently opposed the Bolsheviks and saw the Bolsheviks and the Russian Revolution as evil and authoritarian, and they spread the same propaganda against the Soviet Union that the imperialists spread. But Lloyd George, who was a conservative in Britain, he was a conservative, and he wanted to defeat the Labour Party. The Labour Party were a party of opposition to him. And so Lloyd George accused the British Labour Party of being funded by the Soviet Union and of being agents of the Soviet Union. And it was very famous, right? The British Labour Party, there was a hysterical campaign against them after World War I, as they said, well, they call themselves socialists, and the Bolsheviks are socialists also. So there was a hysterical campaign against them, claiming the Labour Party was funded by the Soviet Union. And eventually they produced what was called the Zinoviev letter. And this was Russiagate. Circa 1924. The conservatives made up this document. It was fake. They circulated this fake letter claiming to show that Zinoviev, a leader of the Soviet Union, had been funding the Labour Party in Britain. And it was false, right? It was a forgery. This was Russiagate 1924. You know, all the Russiagate bullshit we went through. Well, they ran it just like they said Trump. They say Trump is an agent of Russia. Well, the Zinoviev letter back in 1924, the conservatives said that the Labour Party was agents of Russia. And it was the same lie. They had Russiagate 1924 against the Labour Party. And that is when Lenin said it was strategic in the early 1920s to support the Labour Party, because there was this campaign against it. The conservatives were hoping that the fear of communism and the fear of the Soviet Union could be used to crush the Labour Party. Even though the Labour Party was a sellout party, it was still their rival party, right? Democrats will look for any excuse to crush the Republicans. Republicans will look for any excuse to crush the Democrats. So in Britain, you know, the Conservative Party thought, oh, well, everyone's afraid of communism. Everyone's afraid of communism. And the Labour Party, they're calling themselves socialists or whatever. So we can create hysteria against them. And so they created the Zinoviev letter. And it was proven to be a forgery. It was all a big lie. But there was a whole campaign against the Labour Party. And it was before the Zinoviev letter incident of 1924. It was in the early 1920s that Lenin said that at that moment, at that unique circumstance where there was a hysterical campaign against the Labour Party, that it would be strategic for the communists to endorse the Labour Party. He said, but only because the British government, the ruling class, were calling it communist when it wasn't, only because there was a hysterical campaign against it, and only because supporting it, defending the Labour Party, would enable the communists to meet workers in the Labour Party and win them to actual socialism. And Lenin went as far as saying that our support for the British Labour Party will be much like the support that a noose gives to a hanged man. That's the quote. We will support the Labor Party in the same way that a noose supports a hanged man. Meaning, we will support the Labor Party so we can destroy the Labor Party. That is what he was saying. We only are supporting the Labor Party so that we can get access to the workers in the Labor Party and teach them why the Labor Party is bullshit and get them to join the Communist Party. So Lenin right there, he's saying, yeah, okay, we're going to strategically endorse them, but we are only doing it because of the fact that this is the most effective way to destroy them. So even when Lenin is saying to vote for the Labor Party, he's still saying, because we want to destroy them. We will give them the same kind of support that a noose gives a hanged man. This is very important. Now, the Labor Party eventually took power in the 1930s. Ramsay MacDonald was a Scotsman. He was a leader of the British Labour Party. He was elected to be the Prime Minister of Britain. He was a brutal anti-communist, but he was trying to offer some reforms during the Great Depression, but it didn't really fix things. I think people were still starving on the streets during the Second World War and in the lead up to the Second World War. After World War II, however, because the Nazis had been right-wingers and conservatives, and because of the fact that the Soviet Union had kicked the Nazis' ass, and because the labor unions had been so essential in winning the war, after the Second World War, there was a huge sweep in Britain for the Labour Party. And the Labour Party, they took power in the 1950s. And they were very powerful in Britain. And part of the reason they were very powerful was because Britain had been bombed. It had been destroyed. And they needed the government to rebuild everything. This is interesting. During World War II, all the railroads had been blown up. All the mines had been destroyed. The whole country had been bombed to shit by the Nazis. Well, they couldn't. How were they going to rebuild it? The government had to rebuild it. So after World War II, the Labour Party was elected and they nationalized the railroads and they nationalized the mines and they created a national health care service. That's why Britain has free health care. And they created all kinds of laws. And the Labour Party was elected, into power in the 1950s in Britain. And actually, many people point out that in the 1950s, Britain had a roughly the same rate of government ownership that the Soviet Union had. People say, how does that make any sense? Well, it makes perfect sense because the country had been destroyed, and so the government had to rebuild it. The capitalists needed Britain to have trains, and they needed Britain to have electricity and coal mines that dug up the coal so they could burn the coal and have the electricity. They needed Britain to be functioning as a country. And so they needed the government, the state, to take control of the major industries to rebuild them. But was Britain socialist in the 1950s when the government nationalized everything and was paying was taxing people to pay to rebuild everything? Was Britain socialist then? No. Because what they were doing was they were rebuilding Britain so that the British bankers could continue to dominate the world. It was capitalism with heavy state involvement. It was state-managed capitalism. And the same British corporations that dominated the world, HSBC Bank and British Petroleum and the huge monopolies that were impoverishing the world, were still impoverishing the world. They just had to pay a lot of taxes. And with those taxes that they paid, the British government, rebuilt the railways and it rebuilt the mines and it created a national health care service. And the British government in the 1950s and 60s spoke in the name of socialism. They would often get up and say that we are building a socialist society in Britain. And it's a democratic socialism, but they were the biggest anti-communists you would ever meet. And they were lining up with the United States in a nuclear arms race against the Soviet Union. And in the 1950s, the people of Kenya wanted their independence. And at the same time, you had socialists running Britain. The people of Kenya wanted their independence. They wanted to become an independent country. The Land and Freedom Army rose up. And so what happened? The British brutally crushed the Land and Freedom Army. And I actually, again, I'm just going to start getting up and getting books off my shelf because that's the way you got to do it, right? But if you want to learn about imperialism, right? They've got these books you'll find at Barnes and Noble telling you how horrible Stalin was, how horrible Mao was. Go read this book, Imperial Reckoning: The Untold Story of Britain's Gulag in Kenya. In response to the people of Kenya wanting their independence, wanting to not be colonial slaves anymore, the British committed genocide. They rounded up thousands and thousands and thousands of Kenyan men and worked them to death in prison camps in response to the Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s. You go read Imperial Reckoning, right? This was done by socialists, right? The British socialists, the Democratic Socialists, Keir Starmer's party, speaking in the name of socialism, but it was democratic socialism, like Bernie Sanders. It was that kind of democratic socialism, right? That's who did this. Right? Go read Imperial Reckoning. They want to tell you how bad Stalin was. Read what the British did to the people of Kenya. And as you read the horrors of what the British Empire did to the people of Kenya who were fighting for their freedom, how it genocided them, keep in mind that the whole time that they were doing this evil crime against the Kenyan people, they were speaking in the name of socialism. You cannot be a socialist and be part of the global imperialist system. It's not socialism if it's imperialism. If it's a welfare state, if it's redistributing the profits of the imperialists, it's not socialism. And in the 1950s and 60s, Britain had the Labour Party running the country. But then in the 1970s, you had the end of the post-World War II economic expansion. So, right, let's remember, after the whole world was blown up during the Second World War and destroyed by the Second World War, the Great Depression ended and the crisis of overproduction was resolved, and you had the greatest episode of mass growth in human history, the post-World War II economic expansion. The 1950s was the golden years in America. You had the rise of the social democratic welfare states in Europe. You had the Soviet Union rebuilding countries. Eastern Europe is becoming electrified. And you have various military governments that are aligned with the United States that are, like the Shah of Iran, that did a lot of industrialization of Iran during the early 60s. You had the White Revolution, land redistribution, all kinds of things. That in the 1950s and 60s, the global economy was exploding. It was booming, and people were rising up out of poverty, getting electricity, etc. The greatest episode of economic growth in human history. However, it came to an end in the early 70s. 1971 to 1973, you had a very big economic downturn. And the post-World War II economic expansion came to an end. And so in Britain, just like in the United States and everywhere else, suddenly people that have seen their living standard go up throughout the entire 1950s, throughout the entire 1960s, are suddenly seeing their living standard go down. So what do? Well, in the United States, they elected Ronald Reagan to be the president because Ronald Reagan said he was going to bring back the 50s. In Britain, they elected Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher was a conservative who got in and privatized many of the things that had been nationalized by the Labour Party. Many of those railroads that the British government rebuilt with taxpayer money were sold to private companies, right? And that Margaret Thatcher was a conservative. And she presided over the rolling back of a lot of the welfare state reforms, right? And Margaret Thatcher is she has the famous quote, "Socialism doesn't work because eventually you run out of other people's money." Well, what's she talking about there, right? And that has nothing to do with socialism, right? If all Stalin had done was redistribute wealth that already existed, Russia would still be an agrarian, impoverished country. If all Mao had done is redistribute wealth that was already there, China would still be the sick man of Asia. Socialism is not the redistribution of wealth. It is breaking out of imperialism and having a centrally planned economy to build and construct, right? It's a change in how the economy works. But Margaret Thatcher wasn't talking about Stalin when she said that. She wasn't talking about Mao. She wasn't talking about Kim Il-sung. She wasn't talking about Fidel Castro. Margaret Thatcher was talking about the Labour Party. And that's what the Labour Party did. They were social democrats, tax and spend. You tax people, and with the tax money, you give health care to people, you have the government run the railroads, etc. That's what Margaret Thatcher was talking about. Not socialism, but social democracy, right? And yeah, social democracy is redistribution of income. It is the taxation of wealthy people in order to subsidize a welfare state. And every capitalist country does that to some degree or other. Sometimes they do things more, sometimes they do it less, right? And she did also say there's no such thing as society, just individuals. And that's interesting because that phrase is something I think a lot of the woke left would agree with. What she was saying was that we have no obligation. The idea that there's a collective human will, that we have an obligation to each other. No, we're just individuals. That's a statement of liberalism. But, the left says the same thing, right? The breakdown of any sense of collectivism. But she really exposed what she was about when she said there's no such thing as society, only individuals, meaning that the idea that we owe you anything, right? The idea that we owe you anything, the idea that because you're alive, you have the right to a job, healthcare, and education, that's wrong because you're just an individual. We have no collective will. That's Margaret Thatcher. So Margaret Thatcher ran the country of Britain. There was the miners' strike of 1984, which was because the mines in Britain were nationalized, and the coal miners, when they didn't get what they wanted, they would go on strike. And if the coal didn't go into the power plants, the electricity went off in the country. And so the coal miners had very good wages because, they demanded. And these are working class people, right? You go to those coal fields in Scotland. You talk about Newcastle and other places. Those coal miners, those are working class guys, hardworking working class guys. But they realized that, hey, we can make the lights go off. And they did. And when they wanted a raise in pay, when they wanted better benefits and more time off, they would go on strike. And the government would have to give them what they wanted because they dug the coal. And without the coal, the coal power plants couldn't burn coal anymore. And they would turn the lights off, right? And so they had this... what do you call it? This veto power, you could say, over the government in Britain, that they could turn the lights off. So Margaret Thatcher decided she was going to go to war with the coal miners union, and the head of the coal miners union was a communist, and his name was Arthur Scargill. Arthur Scargill was not a social imperialist. Arthur Scargill was an admirer of Stalin. Arthur Scargill was a friend of Gaddafi. And the leader of the miners' union in Britain was Arthur Scargill. And Arthur Scargill, there was 1984 was a huge battle in Britain. And no, it was not in 1974. It was in 1984. 1984 miners' strike. There was a strike. There were many miners' strikes in the 70s, but the big one was in 1984. Come on, man. Miners' strike, 1984, right? 1984 through 1985 was the big miners' strike in the United Kingdom that lost, and Margaret Thatcher mobilized against the miners' union, but Arthur Scargill was the leader of the miners during that strike. That's important history. So then what happened, right? What happened in the late 80s, early 90s? All the socialist governments are collapsing. And that trend of austerity, of cutting social benefits, of impoverishing people, weakening the power of labor unions, cutting social benefits, cutting into social spending, that's rising because the Soviet Union's gone. And they're calling it the end of history. And they're saying, and so then we get the rise of Tony Blair. And Tony Blair is a member of the Labour Party who says, the world has changed, but the Labour Party hasn't. Class struggle is out of date. And Tony Blair emerges as the leader of the Labour Party, and he abolishes Clause 4. He removes Clause 4 from their constitution, right? He gets rid of this. No longer does the Labour Party even pretend to be a socialist party. They just say that socialism means a good economy for everyone. They want to have a good economy. Well, that's great. I don't know any politician who would run for office saying he wants a bad economy. And the Labour Party announces they no longer believe in public ownership of the means of production, right? And they called it New Labour. And Tony Blair ran Britain in the 1990s because it took a lefty to implement austerity. If Margaret Thatcher had tried to do the things that Tony Blair had done, there would have been resistance. But because it was done by a socialist, a lot of people went along with it, just like in the United States. It took Bill Clinton to end welfare as we know it. It took Bill Clinton to sign NAFTA. It took Bill Clinton to set up mass incarceration because it took a liberal to do it. Because if a Republican had done it, the labor unions would have resisted. There would have been big protests, but it was a Democrat who did it. And you took the words out of my mouth, Jenny Lynn, because just like Tony Blair formed what was called New Labour in Britain to get rid of Clause 4 and to lead the labor government, the labor unions, to be the party of austerity, Bill Clinton formed the Democrat Leadership Council, the DLC. And the labor leaders, the New Labour of Tony Blair and the DLC of Bill Clinton, are basically the same entity. In America, we had DLC Democrats who set up mass incarceration, who implemented, the cuts in welfare as we know it, cut off aid to mothers with children, created the North American Free Trade Agreement that, basically just destroyed the economies of Mexico and Haiti, and also got rid of all kinds of American jobs and weakened labor unions. Bill Clinton's administration was awful, but if he had been a Republican, he wouldn't have gotten away with it. And the Labour Party in Britain and the Democrat Party in the United States implemented austerity with the labor unions backing them up. And that's the most important thing to remember. The whole time that Tony Blair was cutting social benefits for British workers, the British labor unions were all saying, you've got to vote for Tony Blair, you got to vote for Labour, or else the conservatives will get in there. And at the same time that Bill Clinton was saying, I'm going to end welfare as we know it, I'm going to impoverish you because I care about you, I'm Bill Clinton. At the same time he was doing that, all the labor union leaders were saying, you got to vote for Bill Clinton or else the conservatives are going to get in there. That you needed the fake socialists to do it, right? You couldn't have implemented the austerity. Just like you couldn't have had World War I without fake socialist leaders leading the workers off to die. You could not have had austerity in Britain and the United States without fake socialist leaders of labor unions, people like John Sweeney, the leader of the American Federation of Labor in the 1990s, was a member of DSA. John Sweeney, a guy named John Sweeney, was a labor leader of DSA. And you needed John Sweeney to lead the labor unions not to fight back, to tell the labor unions to go out and campaign for Bill Clinton, because if not, the Republicans, oh no, right? It takes fake socialists. It takes fake socialists. Don't forget this, that social imperialism is an essential part of imperialism, right? That fake socialists, people that speak in the name of socialism, speak in the name of progressive values, but implement the policies of degrowth, austerity, and war, they are an essential part of imperialism. And that you're not being sectarian, you're not being a downer if you oppose them. You're doing your job if you oppose them, right? This is what Out of the Movement to the Masses is all about. Lenin saw what these people were about back in the 19-teens, and he said, we don't want to recruit them. And that, so many communists have not learned this lesson. They think that their job is to go to wherever the Democratic Socialists of America are, go to wherever the Labor Party is, go to wherever the fake socialists are and raise their hand in the back of the room. Ooh, 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 call on me. Ooh, 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 call on me. That's not your job, right? And that's what so many people do. Trotskyites are the worst at this. But it's not just Trotskyites. Maoists do it. All kinds of people. It's that if you're that somehow being a revolutionary means you go to where the fake socialists are, where the DSA is, where the labor union bosses, the corrupt union bosses that support war and all that, and you go and you stand in the back of the room and go, ooh, 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 I got a question. Can you call on me? Oh, maybe we should oppose the war. Oh, don't take the mic. And they think their job is to just be the radical opposition within social democracy. They think that that is their job. They think that that's what it means to be a socialist, is that wherever the fake left is, you go there and try to nudge them in a better direction. That's not what Lenin said to do now, is it? What did Lenin do in Russia? He formed an entirely different group called the Bolsheviks. He said, we're not even going to use the name social democracy because we don't want anyone to confuse us with those people. We're the Communist Party now so that no one thinks we have anything to do with these motherfuckers. And what did Lenin say? Our job is to go lower and deeper to the real masses. Give up on the movement. We shouldn't give a shit what DSA says. We shouldn't give a shit what CPUSA says. We should give a shit what the people in your neighborhood say. And we need to go lower and deeper to the real masses with a message of anti-imperialism and a message that exposes the opportunists. That's what Lenin wrote. Right? And our movement has nothing to do with their movement. Their movement is about defending the temporary privileges of some workers that come from maintaining this imperialist system. And our movement is about getting the workers of the Western countries and the workers of the colonized world to align with each other to defeat imperialism. Our job is to get workers in the United States to realize China is their friend against the DSA. Our job is to get workers in America to realize that Russia is their friend against Joe Biden. Our job is not to stand in the room of socialists who support Joe Biden and go, ooh, ooh, call on me. No, that's not our job. Right? Lower and deeper to the real masses. And that's our job. And the masses hate the fake socialists. They hate them. They can't stand them. And we should hate the fake socialists just as much as the masses do. Because the masses can see they're full of fraud and lies. And so can we. You know, I have been to AOC's district. Nobody in AOC district likes AOC. The only reason that anyone in AOC's district likes her is that many people of color think that she's a role model. They think that their daughter could grow up to be an important person as well. They see her as an identity politics role model, but that's it. You go out to the Bronx, you go out to Queens, where our fake socialist here in New York City, our cover girl fake socialist is in power. And you ask the people there, has she done anything for you? And they will say, no, she hasn't done shit for us. That's all they'll say, right? The only support that they might give her is on the basis of identity politics. They say, well, she's a brown woman. I'm a brown person. I want my kids to grow up to think they could be in Congress. Whatever. But nobody in the Bronx thinks that AOC has helped them in any way, because she has not. She has not helped them in any way. She's a fraud. And if we go around saying, well, we like AOC, we're going to look like idiots, right? Right? We're going to look like complete idiots if we start going around saying, oh, we like AOC. Well, the masses are going to think that we're frauds just like AOC. We need to go to the masses and say AOC is full of shit. And they agree. And we'll tell you why. Right? And that this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see, right? Is this idea that we should have some loyalty to the left, some loyalty to social democracy. We have none. We're not happy that the Labour Party is in power. They couldn't even let Jeremy Corbyn be their leader. Jeremy Corbyn was pro-Palestine. And so they had a whole campaign accusing him of anti-Semitism, and they've expelled anybody in the Labour Party who's pro-Palestine. Anyone who has a Palestine flag, anyone who is sympathetic to the Palestinians, the Labour Party has expelled them. At this point, the Labour Party is the Labour Zionist Party. They are a pro-Israel party, right? I mean, Keir Starmer bent over backwards to be pro-Israel. I mean, it's ridiculous. While Israel's committing a genocide, he bent over backwards to demonize Russia. You know, so the Labour Party is a great example, right? But we need to understand this because it's the same process that goes on. Now, what happened? Well, we all know that, right? That we all know that that the president of the United States after Bill Clinton was George W. Bush. And George W. Bush invaded Iraq based on lies about weapons of mass destruction. Well, who was running Britain at that time? Tony Blair, right? From the Labour Party. The Labour Party led Britain to be a big supporter of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. British troops were sent to Iraq to overthrow an independent country with lies about weapons of mass destruction. And after Tony Blair, you had Gordon Brown, who was another one of these fake socialists. And then at that point, people were like, okay, the Labour Party in Britain, they haven't really improved things. And so people started voting for the Conservative Party. And so the Labour Party was in a lot of confusion because Tony Blair had been running things for a while and the Labour Party just kept losing. And the Conservatives were in power in Britain. And the Conservatives were running Britain. The Conservatives have been running Britain for a while. Boris Johnson, etc. They've been running Britain. And the Conservative Party's been winning. The Conservative Party has continued to win, has continued to be victorious because the Labour Party proved it didn't have anything to offer. So then, around the same time that Bernie Sanders had his upsurge in the United States, Jeremy Corbyn arose in Britain. And Jeremy Corbyn, you know, he sounded like a real socialist. He sounded like he really was a genuine socialist. He talked about workers controlling the means of production. He was sympathetic to Cuba, etc. And most people in the Labour Party, your average Labour person, you know, even though their party is a pro-imperialist party, a lot of the rank and file Labour Party members liked what Jeremy Corbyn had to say. And so Jeremy Corbyn became kind of the face of Labour. And, you know, he pandered really hard to the woke stuff, unfortunately. And he did the worker cooperative thing. And his platform was all about forming worker cooperatives and all, you know, he pandered very hard to the woke thing, but he did have an anti-imperialist track record. He was pro-Palestine. But then they started up, he's anti-Semitic. And they started the anti-Semitism campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. He supports the Palestinians, so he must hate the Jews. And then they kicked him out of the Labour Party. And they kicked all his supporters out of the Labour Party. And the Labour Party in the last couple of years had a purge. And what was interesting about that purge is a couple times the Zionists in the Labour Party who kicked out Jeremy Corbyn slipped. And this is really interesting. And they said that criticizing capitalism is anti-Semitic because rich is code for Jew. You can look this up, right? There was a whole article written in National Review by Jonah Goldberg. And Jonah Goldberg wrote an article called Karl Marx's Jew-hating conspiracy theory. And a lot of these these Labour Party members that were pro-Israel, that were anti-Jeremy Corbyn, they all started saying things like, yeah, well, you know, we all know that when these socialists that are anti-Israel, when they say rich or they say bankers, what they really mean is Jew. And basically the woke people in Britain have decided that if you genuinely believe in class struggle, hey, thank you, Garland, you're doing great work on your channel, that's somehow coded anti-Semitism, right? That's the argument that they started making. It was crazy. So now Keir Starmer, and the Labour Party, they just won this one by default, right? They didn't win. The Conservative Party folks stayed home. And the Labour Party, they're the other big party. They won by default. But the Reform Party of Nigel Farage, they won significant victories as a smaller party. In addition to that, the Scottish National Party, another fake left fake socialist party, they sunk, at the polls. And so now we have a Labour government in Britain. But therein lies the rub, as Shakespeare would have said. Because at the end of the day, this is just reshuffling the deck chairs of the Titanic. Because ever since 2008, Western capitalism has been in a state of confusion. The post-World War II economic expansion has come to an end. The post-World War II political setup has come to an end. There is a deep economic crisis in the Western world. And the capitalists, the rich and powerful, are fighting among each other. They all want this crisis to end. They want society to be stable. However, at the same time, they all want the other guys to pay for it. And the crisis is rooted in the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profits. And that's something I've talked about on these streams endlessly. With the computer revolution, we can produce products more efficiently than ever before, and the ability of workers to buy back what they produce has gone down, and human labor has been replaced by technology. There is poverty because of abundance. People are homeless because there are too many houses. People are hungry because there is too much food. And the computer revolution has made that so much worse than it was before. And all of this has led to a crisis in Western society they just can't resolve. And at the same time, they can't resolve the crisis here at home and the economic crisis. There's a whole new economy rising in the world that doesn't have this problem. And it's centered around Russia and China and the BRICS countries, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba. And there's this whole new economy that's just speeding ahead while their economy is crashing and burning amid a long-term crisis of overproduction. So the capitalists are fighting among themselves. And they keep trying to come up with a new formula that'll bring stability. And they tried Barack Obama and this kind of revamped liberalism in the United States. They brought back the Carter era, right? The Brzezinski faction, the degrowth Eastern establishment, the more managerial, wing of the ruling class that had really been out of power since the time of Carter. Bill Clinton was not really solidly with them. The Jimmy Carter era, Jimmy Carter politics has come back and runs the Democrat Party. Brzezinski, Eastern establishment, degrowth, that's what's running the Democrat Party right now. And they ran the Obama administration, didn't solve the crisis. Donald Trump became president, and his rhetoric was much more far right in the way it sounded. He sounded a lot more like the John Birch Society. He sounded a lot more like a libertarian. But his governance, if you look at what Trump did, aside from a few, outliers like going to meet with Kim Jong-un, other than that, meeting with Kim Jong-un, and there were a couple occasions where he just flat out didn't do what they wanted. He governed pretty much like George W. Bush, right? He lifted taxes on corporations. He lifted restrictions on drilling on public land. He was pandered really hard to Israel. He was really angry at Iran. In a lot of ways, the Trump administration was the Bush administration with different words. The rhetoric sounded a lot more radical, a lot more, Alex Jones kind of y, but it wasn't, the policies were very, very much the policies of the Bush administration. And that was one experiment. And did that resolve the crisis? Of course not. And then you had January 6th. Now you got Biden back in. And Biden, he's not resolving the crisis, right? The guy can, barely hold his own in a debate on the stage. So the capitalists are constantly scrambling. How can we find a formula that will bring stability back to society? How can we bring society back to stability? How can we do that? That's what they're trying to figure out. And this is a process called Bonapartism. It comes from the fact that, when capitalist societies have these kind of big crises of overproduction, the same process happens. And Marx was living in Paris in 1850, 1851, and he saw this exact process playing out. France was a republic. It had an elected National Assembly, had a president, etc. But they entered a long-term crisis. People were hungry. There was mass unemployment. There were big riots of the unemployed, etc. So what happened? The capitalists began fighting with each other, and the bankers they picked a guy named Louis Bonaparte, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. They picked him to become the military dictator. And so they violently overthrew the French government, and it was called the coup d'état. And December 10th was the day, I believe. And they formed a mass movement of very, very poor people, the Society of December 10th. Very, very poor, impoverished people, homeless people, vagabonds, criminals, and also weird hippies and other people. And they formed this movement of the lumpen proletariat, of desperately poor people. They got mobs of desperately poor people, criminals, and others, and they assembled them to be out in the streets to demand that there be a military coup. And then the French military marched in and dissolved the parliament, and Louis Bonaparte was declared the military dictator. And many of the richest people in France either went to prison or fled the country for fear of being executed. And so when he became the new dictator, at that point, Louis Bonaparte implemented some rather dramatic reforms. And he had the government build railroads, and he built national hospitals so poor people could get health care, and he created a 12-hour workday in the factories, and he implemented a lot of reforms that would stabilize society. And it kept France stable for another 10 or 20 years, right? It held off an economic crisis. And that's called Bonapartism. And that's what happens in a capitalist crisis. Different factions of capitalists battle for power, but ultimately the only way you can resolve an economic crisis, or at least take action that stabilizes society, is you have to suppress members of your own class, right? And that's the dirty little secret of an economic crisis like that. The only way the capitalists can bring any notion of stability back to society is they're going to have to step on the toes of other capitalists. And that gets messy, right? They're happy to step on our toes. They're happy to throw us in jail or whatever, but they're not happy to, step on the toes of other billionaires, other millionaires. But that's what happens during a capitalist crisis. And there are many examples of this. Roosevelt, was heavy-handed in his repression of those who wanted to overthrow him. Obviously, Adolf Hitler and fascism is one form of Bonapartism. And that when you have a long-term capitalist crisis, at that point, the capitalist class has to heavy-handedly repress other members of the capitalist class in order to stay in power. And you have liberal society collapsing into illiberalism, right? And that is what defines capitalist society in an economic crisis, is that the liberal, free market, free speech, freedom of assembly, all of that starts to disappear as the capitalists start to try and use a heavy hand to stabilize the economic crisis. But ultimately, in these fights between capitalists, working class people are recruited to be the foot soldiers, just like Louis Bonaparte needed his Society of December 10th, right? Working class people are mobilized to be the foot soldiers of one faction of the capitalists against another. And that is what creates the opening for a real revolution. Because working people are usually, the government doesn't want working people to be involved in politics at all. It wants them to be depoliticized, just following the rules. But when the capitalists begin fighting with each other, they need workers to become political because they need workers to be their foot soldiers against other capitalists. And the working class gets political education, and they get involved in activism, and they get involved in movements, and they study ideas. And this is what has always given birth to socialist revolutions. The Russian Revolution started this way. The Chinese Revolution started this way. Every revolution we've ever seen started out as a fight among the ruling class, where the working class were the foot soldiers of one faction against another. And through the process of being awakened, in the process of struggle, they awakened and they eventually became revolutionary. It's a process, and Marx observed this long before any of these revolutions had ever happened. You go and read this book, Capital. Marx talks about the first working class movement in history. It was called the Chartist movement, and it was in Britain. And what was it about? There was a fight in Britain between the land-owning aristocracy, the capitalists who owned land, and the factory owners. And they didn't agree with each other. And so the land-owning aristocracy supported a movement for the rights of factory workers. And so factory workers were encouraged to form unions, were encouraged to engage in efforts to fight their employers. And that opened the door to the emergence of the labor unions and of socialist politics in Britain, right? And that these fights among the capitalists are very important. This is how revolutions begin, as fights among the elite. And so it's very important for us to pay attention to these things. And that, Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, Nigel Farage, these are all fights among the enemy class. But we should be paying close attention to them because they open the door to a fight to bring down imperialism. And that ultimately, right, we are for a new society in Britain and a new society in the United States. We're for a society where the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. And this global system of imperialism is dismantled and society is reorganized in the interests of all the people. That's what we're for. That's what we believe in. And the way to get that is to go lower and deeper to the real masses and build a movement for it in solidarity with the oppressed countries of the world that have broken free, exposing imperialism. We got to just go build a mass movement. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation is doing. And, that's what we're all about. Lower and deeper to the real masses. Do outreach. Engage ordinary people. And I guess I've been going on for almost an hour, 16 minutes, but tomorrow's Saturday, and I'm sure you all are very happy to be enjoying this stream, and I'm happy to have you all here with me. I just want to end my opening remarks for tonight by telling one last, yes, I will answer the super chat questions after I'm done with my opening remarks. That's how this show works, Carter. But I want to just go over one point that may seem unrelated. It may seem completely unrelated, but it is heavily related to everything we're talking about here. There was once an empire that dominated the entire modern world. And that was called the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, in the age of slavery, before feudalism, before capitalism, in the age of slavery, the Roman Empire dominated the world. And the Roman Empire, it had a huge army. And with this army, it would extract slaves and tribute, material goods, food, metal, etc., from different nations throughout the world. They conquered nations and they forced them to pay tribute. That's how they existed. And it all went to one city, Rome, on the Italian peninsula. And the Roman Empire was the first place in history that you had the proletariat. The word proletariat actually comes from ancient Latin. The proletariat, the literal meaning of the word is it's one who has children. That's the literal meaning of the word. One who has children. Why does it mean that? Because in ancient Rome, you had slaves and they were owned by somebody else. And you had landowners, right? You had patricians and plebeians. They were both landowning classes. They were the original, the new city and the old city, like new residents of the city and people who'd been there from the beginning, patricians and plebeians, right? And the patricians and the plebeians were the landowners. And then you had slaves, which was the majority of the population. And they were owned by somebody else. But in Rome, you had the very beginning of another class of people. And they were called proletarians because their only property was their children, right? In ancient Roman, understanding, your children were your property. And the proletarians' only property was their children, was their procreation. And those folks were largely not from Rome, and they were Greeks and Jews, largely. There were other nationalities and ethnicities among them. It was largely Greeks and Jews. And they had skills, usually. They did something that a slave could not do. Your slave could do hard labor or whatever, but, being a bricklayer, like the skill of being a bricklayer, that was something you needed a skilled laborer to do. So you had to have a mason to be your bricklayer. So you would need to, have somebody who knew the art of bricklaying, a skilled worker. Well, you had to have somebody come in who knew what they were doing. Doctors, right? People who knew about herbs and could heal people, right? You can't just have any slave do that. You have to have somebody who at least knows something about what they're doing. And so you had various skilled workers in Rome from somewhere else, mainly Greeks and Jews. And they were the proletariat because they had no property except their children, right? And those were the proletarians of Rome. And because the proletarians existed in Rome, Rome had something that no society in history had ever had before: unemployment. Slaves are never unemployed. Landowners, they're never unemployed. But if a proletarian cannot be hired to work, they can't live. And people from all over the world, some of these great kings that would be brought to Rome to see the capital of the empire that they paid tribute to, Cleopatra and others, would be horrified to see that the streets of Rome were full of homeless children. And they said, how can this be? Rome is the center of the world. In North Africa, the Middle East, all the way up into Britain, Europe, everyone's paying taxes to Rome. Rome has more money and wealth than anybody else. But yet the streets of Rome are full of desperately poor, hungry children. Why? Because they're from proletarian families. And if the proletarian can't work, it can't pay its rent where it lives, it's out on the street. And the proletarians of Rome became an increasingly important layer of the country, of the city-state. This class of people that were neither slaves nor masters. Men of no property. That's what some people have referred to the proletarians as. The proletarians are the men of no property. Women were considered to be property, but men who did not own any land and did not own any slaves, their only property was their wife and kids. The men of no property, they were the proletarians, or the proletariat. And the proletariat became an increasingly important part of Roman society. And the way Roman civilization worked was that every group had its own religion. And this is very interesting, right? In ancient Rome, it was a polytheistic society, meaning they had many different gods. However, the god that you worshipped was related to your job. The military worshipped Mars, the god of war. His color was red, and they had a special temple for Mars, and they had special stories and legends of Mars. And the longer that you were in the military, the higher up you got, the more you learned aspects of what they called the mystery cult, or the mystery of Mars, right? The sailors, they worshiped the god Neptune, the god of the ocean. And there were different legends and myths. There was a special temple of Neptune. And the longer that you were a sailor, the more you learned some of the secret legends and the secret code words and all of that. And that these were religions that were, first of all, they were not exclusive, meaning they didn't think that these were the only gods that existed. They believed in many different gods, number one. Number two, that you didn't learn everything up front. You learned a little bit the longer you were in it. The longer you were a bricklayer, the longer you were a military guy, the longer you were a sailor, you learned more and more. It was like you gradually learned over time, right? And that's how these religions were set up, that all the big professions had a special god or deity that was their deity, that had temples, and these were called the mystery cults, or the mystery religions of ancient Rome. And it was how Rome stayed together, right? And the Roman leaders realized you couldn't have a society that functioned if everyone believed the same thing, right? And so you had one truth for the military, and that was the truths of the cult of Mars. You had one truth for the sailors, that was the truths of the cult of Neptune, and that different sections of society had different mystical beliefs that you learned, and it was secret. And this is how Roman society was set up. So every group that was being organized had its own religion, basically, had its own practices. And what we know as a fact, and what you can read in the very important book, The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky, is that the reason that Christianity exists is because Christianity started out as the mystery cult of the proletarians of Rome. That many of the proletarians of Rome were Jews from Palestine who were skilled, and they were skilled craftsmen. And so the legend of a carpenter, a skilled craftsman like themselves, a carpenter who had emerged in Palestine to lead an uprising against the Roman Empire, to destroy the Roman Empire. This great teacher, the Son of God, a carpenter in Palestine who had led an uprising and was fighting for a world where the last shall be first and the first shall be last. That became what the Roman proletarians believed in. And as they began fighting for their rights, going on strike and withholding their labor, that is what the Roman proletarians began practicing. And they began practicing this religion called Christianity that worshiped a great carpenter, a great zealot who had led an uprising. And he'd been stabbed in the back, betrayed by his good friends, and nailed to a cross and killed. But he rose again. And then he ascended into heaven. And one day he was going to return. And when he returned, he was going to destroy the empire. And that this ancient revolutionary who had fought against the Roman Empire, he had exposed the leaders of his own religion. And his biggest enemy were the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and the leaders of his own ethnic group and the leaders of his own nation. And he said, I've got a message. It's for everybody. It's not just for one race. It's not just for one tribe. I've got a message for all mankind. And also, Jesus said there's only one God. All these other gods, they're fake. There's only one God. And I bring a message from that one God. And that was the Christian religion. It was a religion that came to Rome almost immediately after it started. And it became the religion of the Roman proletarians in their struggle against the landowners to assert their rights. And its message was, and if you look at Christianity, it has a lot of elements of different things in it, right? Many people see the legend, the life and death of Julius Caesar in the stories of Christianity, right? Julius Caesar, right? He was killed on the Ides of March, stabbed in the back by his best friend, betrayed by his best friend. When he first arrives in Rome before his assassination, they give him a big parade, and then he's killed. And he's called, Julius Caesar was called King of the Jews because he gave so many benefits and concessions to the proletarians. Those who didn't like him, they called him the King of the Jews. And that some people see in the story of Jesus the legend of Julius Caesar, the populist Roman leader who'd appealed to the proletarians. Other people see the influence of Roman Stoicism, right? Most Romans were hedonists who lived for pleasure, were sadistic, enjoyed gladiatorial shows and killing. But among the Romans who became weary of that and found that unfulfilling, you had a movement called the Stoics. And the Stoics, right? There's a lot of phrases that were used by the Stoics that ended up in the Bible. As ye sow, so shall ye reap, right? And the Stoics emphasized doing acts of kindness. They emphasized forgiveness, etc. So some people see an influence of the Roman Stoics, but regardless, Christianity emerged as this movement of the proletarians that was underground. And it was a movement that was obsessed with martyrdom, right? And that was a really big part of Christianity, was that to die for your beliefs is the most honorable thing. The founder of the faith, Jesus, he had died for his beliefs. So if you get killed for your beliefs, that makes you, that's exactly what you ought to do. That you're the highest and most loved person. If you will die for your beliefs, you get executed for being a Christian. If you get stoned to death or killed for being a Christian, you are number one. You're automatically going to heaven. That was a big part of Christianity. And Christianity emerged as this movement in the Roman Empire among the proletarians to overthrow the Roman Empire. And when Christianity began, it was very clear that their aim was to have the proletarians overthrow the landowners and to establish a society where those big tracts of land and all that wealth that was owned by the landowners was owned in common by all the people. And they were going to lift up the parts of the world that had been held down by the Roman Empire. And they were going to build one community of mankind. They were going to build a whole new world on the ruins of this empire, that they were the ones at the center of the empire. The proletarians were the ones at the center of the Roman Empire, and they were going to dismantle it from within, and they were going to build God's kingdom on earth. That was what Christianity originally intended to do. But we know what happened, which is that it was hundreds of years that Christianity existed. And as time went on, first they were killing all the Christians. First they were burning all the Christians at the stake and feeding them to lions and all of that. And they just kept growing, and more people would convert to this religion. And so then we know that some among the Roman elite thought that maybe there could be parts of Christianity that would be useful in stabilizing the empire. Like, one thing was that the Christians believed there was only one God. Well, the Roman Empire, they noticed that every time they fought against some different place, the people there would rally around their own local god to fight the Romans. And they said, well, wow, if we make only one God, the state religion of the Roman Empire, then we can outlaw all these other gods. So no one can rally around their own god to fight us. The Roman Empire, Rome, the capital city, had a big problem with homeless children. And one thing that the Christians did as they built their movement of resistance and as they organized for the rights of the workers on the job is they provided services to people. They fed the hungry and they built orphanages. And there's evidence that orphanages for homeless children that were started by Christians started getting funded by the Roman government because they were so useful in making society more stable, because you didn't have so many homeless children running around, that the Christians started these orphanages, and then the Roman government started funding them carefully to make sure that they existed because they were so helpful. And that Christianity became divided. It became divided as it went on because elements of the Roman elite were starting to cultivate and develop a watered down version of Christianity with which they could stabilize their empire. And the original Christians saw this for what it was. They saw it as a fraud. They said, this isn't what our religion's about. Our religion's not supposed to help the Roman Empire. Our religion's supposed to destroy the Roman Empire. I mean, our whole premise is that Jesus is going to return, that we're going to rise up and we're going to overthrow it. But there was another wing of Christianity that said, we can find peace with the empire. Look, they're funding our orphanages, and we know that many wealthy Romans from the landowning class began converting to Christianity. And then we all know what happened was that Constantine, the emperor of Rome, converted to Christianity. And the story is that he heard in his dream a voice say to him, "Under this sign you shall conquer." And there was a cross in the sky, and he woke up and he said, wow, I'm going to conquer with the cross. I better convert to being Christianity so I can conquer people. We know that's not actually true. The real reason that Constantine converted was his mother was a Christian already, because his mother was a wealthy Roman, and many wealthy Romans had already become Christians. And Constantine became the first Roman Empire to convert to Christianity. And then they had Justin the Apostate? And then after that, you had Basically, the Roman Empire became Christianized, but it wasn't real Christianity. It wasn't the original Christianity. It wasn't revolutionary proletarian Christianity. It was a mimicry of it, watered down in order to make the empire function more effectively. And that's what the British Labour Party is. The British Labour Party is socialism in the same way that what the Roman Empire instituted and created is Christianity. It is an attempt to mimic Julian the Apostate. Thank you. It is an attempt to mimic a revolutionary movement to serve the enemy. And that if you read the book of Revelations, this is very interesting. The book of Revelations is it's the last book of the Bible. It's supposed to be a vision that some guy had on the Isle of Patmos. Some people don't know. Some Christians believe it was the Apostle John, and other people say it was a separate John the Revelator or whatever. Regardless, you have emerging within Christianity, you have this document, the book of Revelations. And the book of Revelations, if you read it, it's a wild, heated polemic against sellout Christians. And that's basically what it is. It's a rant against those who are accommodating with the empire. And go and read the book of Revelations in that context, right? And read what it says about the whore of Babylon and those who have drunk of her iniquity, what it says about the traitors and those who speak in the name of Christ, those who say they are Jews but are not Jews, but are the synagogue of Satan, right? It's ranting against sellouts, against people that claim to be Christians but are actually serving the Roman Empire, the Antichrist. The Roman Empire is the Antichrist, and the fake Christians are the whore of Babylon, right? That are serving the Antichrist. All right, and the Roman Empire, is this empire that's dominating global trade, right? And that's, the whole thing about the mark of the beast, right? The idea is that in order to trade in the global economy, you have to have them be the middleman, right? That's why they said all roads lead to Rome, right? You couldn't trade. Rome was the middleman in all trade. Well, that's what the whole 666 shall be the number of the beast, and without the sign of the beast, you can't trade. That's what that's about. So that's how the Romans ruled. They were the middleman in all transactions. They were the financial middleman. They were the businessman. They ran the SWIFT system, if you know what I'm saying, right? They controlled the trade routes. They controlled the financial transactions of the world. And that's what that's about. If you read the book of Revelations, that's what it's about. And the book of Revelations is a wild, angry polemic by somebody who believes himself to be a true Christian and sees the Roman Empire and sees the bulk of Christianity accommodating with the Roman Empire. And he's writing angrily about all kinds of vile punishment that's going to come down against these traitors, and how you just have to stay true and you have to endure persecution, etc. Right? That's what he's doing. Whoever wrote that, that's what he's doing. He's writing about enduring harsh persecution. He's writing about staying true to his principles. That's what the book of Revelations is about. And all of this history is important, because if you can understand that Christianity was the movement of the proletariat in ancient Rome, and if you can understand that communism of today is the movement of the proletariat in the Western capitalist era of imperialism, you can start to understand there's a bit of a cycle going on. And you can start to understand that the choices we make could actually change the course of history and could actually make a difference. Christianity was a purely spiritual movement. Communism, historically has been a purely scientific movement, a materialist movement that rejects any notion of anything spiritual. But it took spiritual power for all those Christians to endure all that persecution, to be willing to be killed and tortured in order to stay true to their faith. And communism in the 20th century, on the one hand, it revealed that it appeals to people on a very, very spiritual level. A very spiritual level. And on the other hand, right, we saw that communism is not God. Right? And that if you believe communism to be an infallible thing, if you believe communist leaders to be infallible, you're going to be very disappointed. And the imperialists, with Khrushchev's secret speech and with all of that, they were very good at playing into the idea that, you thought so and so was infallible, but actually Soviet Union had big problems. The various communist countries that exist have big problems, right? There's no question about that. And that we're in a time now where we can look at the 20th century and we can look at all the great achievements of communist governments. And we can recognize that communism did not lose on the economic front. It lost on the ideological front. It lost because they lost the will to fight. The Soviet Union fell because internally the leaders didn't believe in what they were fighting for anymore. They had been spiritually defeated. Communism was defeated spiritually, not politically. It was defeated because the leadership, like Gorbachev and others, didn't believe in communism anymore. And they'd adopted the new left, the ideology of the Western liberal elite. They'd adopted the Frankfurt School. They'd adopted, democratic socialism. At the time that the USSR fell, Gorbachev, he claimed that Russia was just going to turn into a social democratic welfare state. Right? And that much of the Soviet Communist Party leadership had been taken in by the reformed Marxism and socialism of the human face that was being promoted. The precursor to wokeism had overtaken the Soviet Communist Party. And that it was a defeat on the spiritual plane, not on the ideological plane, not on the economic plane. These are all important questions to take in. Right? And I'm telling you all of this because if you can understand the fake Christianity that the Roman Empire adopted, then you can understand the fake socialism of the British Labour Party and social democracy. But if you understand the parallel between Christianity and ancient Rome and socialism and anti-imperialism in 21st century America, you can understand how important what we are doing here today in our time is. What we are doing with the Center for Political Innovation, what we are doing with our movement. I'm about to put in a whole order for thousands of these to distribute at the upcoming conventions this summer. If you can understand what happened in ancient Rome, you can understand what happened in the 20th century. You can understand that what we are doing now with the Center for Political Innovation, what we are doing now, building an anti-imperialist movement on optimistic growth, not the negativity of standard leftism. If you can understand what all of these historical questions, what they are pointing toward, you can understand that what we are doing now is very, very important. And nobody is doing what the Center for Political Innovation is doing. We are doing something that no one is doing, and we are doing it as pioneers. And as pioneers, we make mistakes because no one's ever done it before. We are in uncharted waters. We are setting out on a new course. That's why we're the Center for Political Innovation. Because just repeating the old mantras ain't going to cut it. We have to innovate. We have to find new solutions. So yes, it's a bumpy ride. Yes, it's very confusing. But let me tell you a story that Lenin used to always tell his followers. The story goes like this. There's two peasants, and they're walking through the countryside. And they see a man up on the hill. And that man up on the hill is waving his arms around crazy. And they think, man, that guy must be having an epileptic fit. And they get a little closer, and that man just looks crazy, just waving his arms and swinging his arms around. And they think, my God, what is wrong with that man? Is he possessed by a demon? Is he having an epileptic fit? Is he rabid? Does he have rabies? Like, what in the world is going on? And they see this guy up there waving his arms. Well, they get closer, and they see that the man is actually sharpening a knife. He's hitting the knife blade against the stone in order to make it sharper. And what they thought was erratic, uncontrolled behavior was actually very, very important and calculated behavior. And Lenin would use that analogy to explain the Bolshevik Party and how the struggles inside the Bolshevik Party were often, they appeared on the outside to look crazy. And they appeared that they were running this way, they were running that way. But actually what they were doing is sharpening their knives for the fight ahead. And that's a story that Lenin tells in many of his lectures. It's one of his most favorite stories. It shows up in a lot of different places. They talk about Lenin using this story. He didn't write it. I believe the story comes from Tolstoy. But it's an important story because right now, it's very hard to do what we are doing. Right? We are in uncharted waters, if there ever was uncharted waters. Right? We are in the process of, no one has ever engaged in the level of political innovation that we are engaging in. We're taking risks. We're engaged. We are in very uncharted waters, and we are definitely going to make mistakes. And there are definitely going to be setbacks along the way, but there are also great victories. And the fact that we have won so many great victories with our meager resources, with our low number of members, less than 200 members, but yet we've won so many great victories. That shows that what we're doing here is very, very important. So on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, and then I will start answering your super chat questions. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. All right, we got Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Welcome, Mark. Carter in Minnesota. San Diego, California. Nate in Chicago. Alex Rickle in Oregon. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox. Isaac in Vancouver. Alex in Brazil. Patch in Arizona. Jenny in Cincinnati. Names and locations. Bob in Troy, New York. Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland, Ohio. Dan Niswander in Los Angeles. Ryan in Kansas City. Tony in Tasmania. Blake in Alabama. John McCarthy in Chicago. Grange over Sands. Trevor in Utah. Gabby in Chicago. Clinton, Fraser, Rice from Adelaide. Joe in Los Angeles. Atlanta. Junior in South Florida. April and Chris in Salt Lake City. Denver, Mosen. Smitty in Chicago. Atlanta, Kingfish, Huey Long. Luca, Singapore. Ed in Louisville. Welcome, Ed. Moonlight Beach, California. Welcome. Names and locations. St. David's, Bermuda. Welcome. Patrick in Maine. You're always here, and we're always happy to have you. Welcome, Patrick. Names and locations. Sherry in Cape May. Good to have you. Names and locations. Cyrus in Cornwall. Moonlight Beach, Scott S. Very good. All right. Well, we've got a few super chats here to answer. But let me just add that if you send a super chat, not only does it give me something to talk about in the second half of our show, but on top of that, it also supports the work that I do, enables me to have this second bedroom here in New York City, where it's very expensive, in order to do my work. So I do appreciate it. Any support that you can throw my way in order to help me, do what I do. Mariah in North Carolina, welcome. Oakland, California. All right. Super chats help me pay my bills. They help this channel keep happening. So there we go. All right. So I'm going to start. I don't see any Rumble rants. I talked about DSA being fake socialists. They are the U.S. wing of social democracy. They were at one point. They have a weird relationship with the Second International. So they are not part of the Second International, I guess, but they sometimes are, etc. So there you go. And I kind of answered that during the stream, but thank you, Gabby. Very important. The Australian Labour Party is not so dissimilar either. Here's the link to what Lennon said about the Australian Labour Party. Well, let's click on that link. I don't know if we'll have time to read it all. Hold on. All righty. Okay. This is an interesting essay written by Lennon about the Australian Labour Party. In Australia, the Labour Party has done what in other countries was done by Liberals, namely introduced uniform tariff on the whole country, a uniform education law, and land and tax factory legislation. Naturally, when Australia is finally developed and consolidated as an independent capitalist state, the conditions of the workers will change. Also will the Liberal Labour Party, which will make way for a real socialist workers' party. Oh, it's an interesting essay about the Australian Labour Party by Vladimir Lenin. All right. All righty. Very good. Very good. That's Lenin on Australia and the Labour Party there. That's from David Fox. Thank you. What do you think about the KKE in Greece? I think that they are doing a bad job, right? I originally looked to them as being some kind of very revolutionary organization, but they have fallen for this line that China is imperialist, that Russia is imperialist, they're neutral in Ukraine. Their imperialist pyramid theory, thoroughly debunked by Joe T. Brar, and it's just complete malarkey. Just complete malarkey. Some of them even argue North Korea is imperialist, and it's really sad because the Greek Communist Party has a very noble history as a very revolutionary organization, but it has really lost its way and it's really deteriorated. It's really, really deteriorated. All right, folks. Well, listen, I don't have air conditioning in this room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open some of the windows and I'm going to get some more ice water. While I do that, I am going to put on some music because I have more super chats that need to be answered. There's more super chats. And if you have any more super chats, by all means, send them. We do appreciate that. And so I'm going to put on, I've played this on here before a while back. I really enjoy listening to this. This is a choir from Salt Lake City, Utah, almost all white people, performing a classic African-American spiritual called He Never Failed Me Yet. They do a very good job with it. And it's kind of ironic because they kind of made it their own. And I don't know, it's uniquely American. These are all a bunch of Mormon high school kids, and they do a very, very good performance of an African-American spiritual in their own way in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I'm going to put that on, while I open the windows and get some ice water, and then I will continue answering super chats. So if you have more super chats, by all means, send them in. Keep me on here until the break of dawn if you want, right? That's what I'm here to do, is to answer your questions, and we'll go from there. All right, everybody. Thank you for sticking around while I opened my windows and put some ice in my water. I do appreciate you sticking around. Couple reminders. First of our morning messages that we play on the CPI YouTube channel. Here, I'll pull up the image and I'll send you the link. Hold on. All right. But every morning we're trying to do these morning messages. I'm making a point of not saying about the like button and all of that. I'm not saying that anymore because I am convinced the only way that CPI is going to grow as an organization is through in real life work. But the role that YouTube and social media plays is to hold this organization together so that we can all be connected with each other. You can start out your day with a revolutionary message. So tune in to the morning message. It's a good one from a member of our community. Not going to reveal who it is, but start out your day with the morning message, right? Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Eastern, it'll premiere the morning message. And when you get up tomorrow or at 6 a.m., take a listen, enjoy it. And if you'd like to make one, send it my way. We'd love to have you, have you make one, have you record it. And that our community, we just need to stay together, right? I am not saying on here about the like button and the subscribe because I'm done with it. And I'll just mention now, my, I'll get to yours in a minute, Carter. But, Garland was on here. Garland is my good friend, and he has sent out a lot of good information about how rigged social media is lately. And, I see that, I get angry about it, but at the end of the day, they're just, again, the training wheels have come off. It just points to the fact there is no excuse, there's no alternative to building the mass movement that we need, right? Getting boosted on social media is nice. Being able to kind of use social media as the foundation to build a movement is great. But at the end of the day, we have to go build this movement. Outreach. Names and contacts, recruitment. And we are in the middle of a kind of a recruitment, or a reorientation as the Center for Political Innovation. And it's change can be frightening, but at the same time, change is important. And yeah, Sam is great. All the morning messages are great, but Sam is great, and Gabby's great, and everybody's great, and that, our community is full of a lot of very, very dedicated people who understand how important this is. Right. And look, I have urged members of the Center for Political Innovation to recognize that we are on a journey of self-discovery and a journey of self-improvement. I know that I wouldn't be able to do anywhere near what I do. I would never have gotten where I've gotten in life if it wasn't for people who pushed me to do it, who challenged me to engage with people, to talk to people, to get out of my comfort zone. Right. And that you have to be able to, that you learn by doing, right? If you want to change things, you got to learn things. If you want to learn things, you got to change things, and you learn by doing. We are building a mass movement, and these live streams hold that mass movement together. They create a place where we can learn together and grow together and talk pretty frequently. But that's what social media does. Social media is a mechanism for bonding our movement together. That's what it is. And we should view it as such. And it's time to go out and build. It's time to go out and build the mass movement. It's time to recruit people who'd never go looking for anything like this. It's time to get out of the movement to the masses. And we've been saying that for a long time. And recent developments have forced us into a situation where we recognize we have no choice. We have to just do it. And so we're doing it, right? And it's not easy, but the training wheels have come off. We have got to build this movement, right? We can't just, rely on social media boosting us or meeting new people from social media. We got to just go build this movement. So thank you, Garland. And, I appreciate, I go on your show very frequently, and you do great work. And I watch the streams you do with Jyoti. It's really, really great. And you are awesome. And thank you for coming to all the CPI conferences that you come to. You're a good friend of our community. And I'm aware that they're rigging it against me and against you and against all of us. And that's why I am even more committed than ever to building the mass movement that we need. Details on Michael Foote and leftist labor leaders in the 80s. Well, the Trotskyites, the militant tendency, they were called, which was a wing of the it was called the International Marxist Tendency. They tried to infiltrate the Labor Party in the 80s, and they actually took over the Liverpool City Council And they were just a group of Trotskyites who, snuck into the Labor Party. And the Labor Party actually still to this day has rules against being a Trotskyite. You can't be any kind of Leninist and be in the British Labor Party, but they do have rules against that kind of thing. But at the same time, there was, during the miners' strike, they needed to kind of, the Labor Party, because they were fighting the conservatives. They did boost and kind of give some play to farther left elements within their own ranks, and they tolerated the militant tendency. As the Labor Party was kind of under attack from Margaret Thatcher, they kind of wanted to rile up kind of a mass movement of opposition. And so you saw kind of a left surge in the Labor Party in the early 80s. But that preempted, eventually you had the rise of Tony Blair and New Labor that came in at the end of the 80s. But yeah, there was, because Margaret Thatcher was going all in against the British miners. Because of that, there was kind of and this is an important thing too, is, a lot of people say that political movements, political leaders, when they're under attack, that what they do is they water it down. That's actually not true, right? On the one hand, yes, in order to get the most votes, you want to appeal to everybody. But in order to win, you have to have a base of very, very enthusiastic volunteers, very, very enthusiastic supporters. And so you have to appeal to fanatics as well. And Trump does that, right? And the Democrats have played that game with communists and socialists before too. It's complicated. And, the Labor Party, for its own reasons, enabled the more far left elements of socialism in Britain to kind of get some play in the early 80s. And Michael Foot, who was a regular Labor Party leader, he wasn't a Trotskyist himself, but he gave them some, he gave the far left some boosting in the age before Tony Blair ultimately took the Labor Party in the full-on neoliberal free market direction that it's gone since then. That's interesting. So yeah, there you go. All right. What's up with Lucas Cage? I don't know who Lucas Cage is. I'm going to have to Google this. Who is Lucas Cage and why was he doxxed? What is this? Lucas Cage, the Power Man actor. What? Lucas Cage doxxed. What's going on here? I don't even know. Huh? I don't even know what the story is. What is going on here? He's an actor who plays Power Man. He's a Zionist doc Lucas Cage. Okay. And so what? I mean, I don't know. Is there political significance to this? Like what's like, I'm missing this, right? He's a character in an American comic book. No, is this a real person? Right. I Googled Lucas Cage and I got, like, who is Lucas Cage? Is he a character in a comic book? Like Luke Cage? Like, who is this person? I don't know what this is. What is this? Nicolas Cage's son? What is going on here? I have no idea what this is about. Okay. Maybe they mean George Lucas. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I wish I knew. He's a real person whose name is Lucas Gage. Gage, not Cage. Come on now. Okay, Lucas Gage. All right, now we're getting someplace. Lucas Gage. Okay. He's an American actor. Right? And he got... Oh, okay. Lucas Gage shows what he really meant by slaying Jewish demons. Okay, he said something anti-Semitic, so the woke people are mad at him. And okay, all right. So this is an actor who, I don't know. Okay, yawn. That was a real yawn, folks. That's how much I care about that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's something to the story I should care about, but I'm just looking at this now, and it sounds like okay. He said something, and it's with a K. It's Lucas K. Lucas Gage revealed the story behind his 6-month marriage to Chris Appleton. What? I don't know. I'm looking at this and I'm just like, huh? Right. But anyway, thank you, Jerry. That's something that I should probably be able to give you more commentary on. I'll have to do some research, but I don't keep up with celebrities. I don't. Right. All right. Jody thinks the elites ran Nigel Farage to take votes away from the Tories because they can use Labour to do their worst. That's interesting. I mean, do I agree with that? I mean, that she would know better than I do. She's in Britain. She follows UK politics, and that's very possible, right? And that the Labour Party has really disappointed, a lot of the people who vote for them. And, he's saying things that conservative people in Britain increasingly believe and agree with. So, I mean, that makes sense. Are they using RFK to help Biden? No. RFK would take votes away from Trump, not from Biden. But they also didn't let him on the debate stage. The more I look at the RFK campaign, I know that there's a lot of efforts to control dissident narratives right now. It's very clear that they don't have control. RFK is pro-Israel, but he's very critical of U.S. foreign policy towards Russia and on the vaccine and on a lot of things. He's against the mainstream. But he's from an elite family. I mean, he's got a president in his background. So, I would argue that the RFK campaign, there's some level of the establishment that thinks it's necessary, perhaps for information purposes, perhaps to try and take control of certain things that he says and guide people who think that way in a certain direction. There's a lot of efforts to manipulate dissent right now because there's more dissent than ever. I don't know if you saw, but Newsweek ran a story today. Russia is now more popular in the United States. Can you believe this, right? With all the anti-Russia hate, support for Russia actually went up by 2 points recently, right? Support for Russia actually increased by 2 points, right? So there you go. Yeah. There you go. So, I mean, it shows they don't control the narrative. They don't control the narrative. Excuse me. I'm just sneezing a lot. There you go. Yeah. There you go. But anyway, they're trying to control dissident narratives. That's what's going on. And I feel like Nigel Farage and RFK are both doing that to some degree, though Nigel Farage is more aimed at taking votes from conservatives. I don't think RFK, I think it's complicated with RFK there. I think there's something more complicated going on. The other thing to remember is that there's no smoke-filled room where all of them are like all on the same page. Among the elite, there are many different agendas. There are many different ideas about what should happen. They're not all like plotting there. So there you go. I will say, folks, thanks for being with us tonight. I did break my fast finally at sundown tonight, and I went and ate a meal. I've been doing 1 meal a day for 5 days. I did 5, and then the sun went down tonight, and I went and had a meal, and I felt so empowered. And, making promises to yourself, I am going to do this, and then doing it is a great way of gaining control and feeling empowered, right? So I made a promise that I was going to do 1 meal a day for 5 days. I was going to do a, 1 meal a day fast, basically, 23-1 diet, as they call it. And I did it for 5 days, and I felt, it was hard. It was very hard, especially Tuesday night. I had a really bad headache. But I got through it. And now I feel better, and that's important. And again, we should all view what we're doing as a journey of self-improvement, right? It's not simply about the result. It's about the fact that we learn to do a better job. We improve our skills as organizers and such. So, this week I made an outreach commitment at our CPI meetings. We're making outreach commitments. I made an outreach commitment that I would do 2 big bricks of palm cards, and I got them out. I did it, right? I got the last of them out today. I was worried because one of the days I went into Manhattan this week, I didn't bring any palm cards with me, and I was worried I wouldn't fulfill it. But I thought, hey, I'm the ideological leader of CPI. If I'm making a promise that I'm going to get out the palm cards, I got to get out my palm cards, right? So I did, right? And I got them out. I'll see what outreach commitment I make to tomorrow. Tomorrow we're having a very important CPI meeting. mean, it's going to be like a normal Saturday meeting, except that it's part of our new turn toward doing mass outreach, which is what we're turning toward. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the stream tonight. I talked about Marxism and all of that. If anyone has any more super chats, they are appreciated. But if not, we will probably end this very soon. We've hit the 2-hour mark. It's after midnight. I'm relieved that my fast is over. And, what do I want to say here? What do I want to say here? I want to say that I love every one of you in our community. And I know that it's really hard. I know that it's very, very hard to stay on the revolutionary road. That demoralization, hopelessness, pessimism is coming at us from every side. It has never been harder to build an organization than it is now. It's never been harder. Never been harder to hold a revolutionary community together than it is now. Okay? And I realize that. And if I can give inspiration to all of you, if I can use these streams to help you all do great things, to help bring some light into your day, to help give you purpose in the way that this movement has given me purpose, I am really honored for the privilege of doing that. If I can teach you something on these streams, if I can use these streams to do some good for the world, that's great. And if the community that we're building, the Center for Political Innovation, can do some good in this world, I'm deeply honored. And that in and of itself is a reward. And I get frustrated sometimes, as does everybody. But I am convinced that we have an important role to play and that we get challenged sometimes. And, we are in the process of a very important transition in CPI. And I think that that transition will lead to our community growing. But it's not going to be easy, nothing, really important things in life are never easy. And that's one thing I have learned in my life. And that you can't expect immediate results. You cannot expect immediate results. So, what do I want to say here? I appreciate all of you. That's what I want to say. I appreciate all of you. And yeah. And I will say, and I've said this before, I appreciate everyone who's persecuted me, because you have made me relentless and strong, because I know how hard it is for people. I don't know directly, but I see how hard it is for some people. I see how difficult it is for people, right? I see how hard it is for people. And I know that if I hadn't been persecuted in the ways that I've been persecuted, I would never have been able to withstand some of what's been thrown at me. And I'm able to withstand it because of all the support I've gotten from all of you, number one. And from number two, because of the fact that I've been through some shit and I've survived and I've come out the other end. Right? And that if, at the end of the day, you can face persecution, you can suffer persecution. But if you believe in what you're doing, and if you're able to withstand and get through it, you're ultimately going to come out stronger. And that's what has happened with us. I have come out stronger. Some things are changing right now. One thing is I'm trying to care less and less about social media numbers and care more and more about in real life outreach. There's other things that are changing right now. But ultimately, I'm on a journey. I'd like to take you with me on that journey. And this journey takes us in new, exciting places, new twists and turns. I don't know if folks are aware. I'll just throw this out there, right? And I don't know if I should say this or not. See, I never know what the right answer is, right? What are you supposed to do? And at the end of the day, there's really nothing you can do. But, they say you're not supposed to boast of your accomplishments, right? But then again, if you don't talk about them, no one else is going to talk about them. I mean, you don't want to be a boastful person, but you also have to advertise what you did, or else no one's going to know about it. And this isn't a boast for me. It's a boast for our community. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do these books without the support I've gotten from various people, but it's our community that has promoted them. I just want you all to know that, in the year of 2023, we sold 923 books. But in the year of 2024, as of today, we've sold 1,015 books. So in the first 6 months of 2024, we have already sold more books, almost 100 more books than was sold in the entire year of 2023. And I'm blown away by that. But, the Houthi book that we published was a big success. The Green book continues to sell. And we're getting the message out there. And that's what matters to me. There are people that are reading these books that we publish. And we're getting a message out there. And I believe that we are having an impact. And that for the next couple months, especially because there's an election coming up, we need to be cautious, right? But that's okay, because now is a time to refine the art of what we do, so that we're not having our convention for another year, which is correct in my view, because that gives us the opportunity to really learn to do outreach and to make sure that convention is packed, right? So I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank this community for all that we've been through together. This is live stream number 754, I believe. I mean, wow. Can you imagine? You go back to live stream number 1. This is live stream number 754. Wow. It's not too much longer. By the end of the year, we're going to have live stream number 1,000. Think about that. And think about how far we've come and how much we've learned together as a community, and imagine what more we have to learn, right? We are on a very, very exciting journey. And, this journey isn't for everybody. I mean, this journey isn't just, for everybody to just jump on. This journey is for those who want to be here. It's for a select few, as they say. And that's fine with me, right? I know why I'm in this, and I know what purpose this serves. And I am dedicated to being successful at carrying out our mission, carrying out successful operations for anti-imperialism. That's what I am dedicated to. We've been through a lot of leaps and evolutions and changes and shifts, and each time we get stronger, and each time we become more impactful. So I'm proud of this community. We're marching forward. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you to everyone who's going to be at the Zoom meeting for CPI tomorrow. The email went out today to all the members. Thank you for everyone who's going to be there. And we just have to be relentless. We must be relentless. So thank you for being relentless. Together, we can combine our strength. Let me just say this, right? That if you're feeling negative, the worst thing you can do is find somebody else who's feeling negative and just bounce your negativity off each other. Because what will happen is there will be an increase in negativity. And part of the reason you owe it to the world to put a smile on your face when you're having a bad day, to tell optimistic and happy news to people, is because if you are positive, you help other people to be positive, right? Human beings play off of each other's energy. So if you're feeling positive, spread that positivity. If you're having a rough day, force yourself to be positive so that others will see that. And once others see that you're positive, they'll get positive, and then it'll be easier for you to be positive. Human beings are collective, and the way we feel is collective. And then if you're spreading negativity, More negativity is going to come back your way. And that's really important to keep that in mind and not forget that. Right? It's really important to be aware. Be aware of these things. We have a job to do. And we're getting better at doing it. We're getting over some big hurdles. I'm proud of us. I'm proud of all that we've accomplished. And I'm looking forward to what we accomplish in the coming months and in the coming year. Mark your calendar, July 12th, 2025. That is going to be one of the most important days of your life. Mark your calendar, July 12th, 2025. All right, it's more than a year away, but take off work, book a plane ticket, make your travel arrangements. Chicago area, July 12th, 2025. Just keep thinking of that date. Just keep thinking of that date. Just don't stop thinking of that date. Just keep that date in mind. That's going to be very, very important. That's the next convention of CPI. And it's going to be a very important day in our community. Keep that day on your mind. Keep that day in your heart. I want to say this also. Today, I had a unique opportunity, which is that I was entering all the CPI members' contact information. I was cutting and pasting, and I got to go through every single CPI member, right? It's not a huge number of people, but it's not a small number either. And it took me quite some time to enter all those names into the contact form that I was using for the email thing I was working on. I went through every name on there. I just thought about all the people that have been impacted by what we do here. All these names, all these people. It's just like, wow. I was just, and I got spiritual about it. I tried to hold every name close to my heart. Tried to think about each person on that list. Yeah, it's a lot. What we have done here and what we continue to do here is not small. It is not small what we're doing here. We're doing and taking on gargantuan tasks. We're accomplishing a lot. We're swimming upstream, and it's not easy. It's difficult, but we keep going. We keep going. We endure persecution. We endure setbacks. The world comes at us, but we keep going. And that in and of itself is its own reward. We want to win. We'll dare to struggle and dare to win, but we have to celebrate what we have done. We have to celebrate all that we have done because we have done an amazing thing, and we're going to continue to do an amazing thing. So mark your calendar. That's going to be a very, very, very important day. That's going to be a very, very important day. So thank you, everybody. And I will see you tomorrow night. I'm going to put on the closing music. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.